At the Battle of Chaeronea, the Greek coalition, composed of Thebans, Athenians and other allied forces, carefully chose the terrain, positioning their line of 35,000 men between a river to the north and a mountain to the south. In this way, they ensured that both flanks were well protected, significantly limiting the effectiveness of Philip's cavalry, which would normally exploit open spaces for flanking maneuvers. On the left side of the line stood 12,000 Athenian hoplites, heavily armed yet with little to no combat experience. In the center were 7,000 hoplites from various Greek cities. The right flank was held by 16,000 well-trained Theban hoplites, with the coalition's strongest unit, the Sacred Band of Thebes, positioned on the far right. This elite force consisted of 300 men, organized as 150 pairs of lovers, each warrior fiercely motivated to protect and impress his partner. Altogether, the coalition was strategically arranged, with its greatest strength concentrated on the far right. The Macedonian forces numbered 30,000 infantry and 2,200 cavalry in total. On the right stood Philip, commanding 7,000 infantrymen with little to no armor but experienced in battle. In front of them were 1,000 missile troops, including archers and javelin throwers. At the center of the formation was the imposing Macedonian phalanx, a wall of spears formed by 15,000 soldiers. To the left of the center was another infantry group numbering 6,000 men. On the far left of the Macedonian line, Alexander led 2,200 cavalry, including his elite companions. Farther to the left, another 1,000 archers were positioned to provide support. At the start of the battle, Philip, being a genius military leader, made a move that might not have made sense at first glance. He ordered a charge against the Athenian left flank, even though his lighter armored units were outnumbered almost 2 to 1. But Philip's troops had something the Athenians lacked: experience and discipline. If you want to find out why this was extremely important, we have an episode on that, so you can watch that episode first. Philip's troops, along with the projectile units, advanced toward the Athenian left flank. When they reached the throw line, Philip ordered them to harass the enemy, hoping to bait the Athenians into charging. However, the Athenians did not take the bait, and due to their good armor, no serious damage was inflicted. Philip then ordered his infantry to charge at their position. Seeing this, Alexander commanded the rear lines to move forward at a slow pace, positioning them to assist his father more quickly if and when needed. The armies fought at that position for several hours, but neither side appeared to be winning. Eventually, Philip organized a retreat. The Athenians, believing the Macedonians were about to flee, pursued them in hopes of inflicting more damage. Now, it's important to consider the equipment. As we previously explained, the Macedonians had lighter armor, which meant they were naturally less exhausted after the prolonged fight. In contrast, the Athenians, burdened by the weight of their heavier armor, grew increasingly fatigued after hours of fighting. Although their armor was designed to protect them, it had now become a burden, especially as they decided to chase the Macedonians. Fighting and walking simultaneously demanded even more energy from the already weary Athenians. Once Philip's line caught up with the Macedonian units that had been slowly and casually advancing toward his position, they too changed direction and began to fall back. At this point, it seemed like a victory for the coalition was within reach. The problem was that the Athenians were now getting farther away from the rest of their army. To address this issue, a portion of the central forces moved to assist them in pursuing the retreating Macedonians. As they engaged the Macedonian phalanx, Alexander chose this moment to strike, but not in the way one might expect. Instead of charging forward, he led his cavalry to the opposite side, utilizing their speed to outmaneuver the infantry. He ordered the rest of the troops to follow and charge head-on. Simultaneously, Philip halted the retreat and began to press the weary Athenians harder. Alexander exploited this advantage even further once the infantry caught up by flanking the enemy, attacking from behind. Seeing themselves pushed from one side by horsemen towards pikes many meters long, with no chance of reaching their attackers, more and more soldiers began to flee. This part of the army consisted of Greek city-state, hoplites and mercenaries. Mercenaries fight for gold, but they need to live to spend it, so they were likely to first run, followed by the hoplites. Once the center gave up and fled, the other Athenians followed, leaving the Thebans alone. They too were attacked by Alexander, and once their formation was disrupted, they began to flee one by one, with the rout spreading like a disease throughout the whole army, except for one section, the Sacred Band. These warriors fought like lions. As previously mentioned, they fought to impress and protect their lovers. Unfortunately, being attacked from multiple sides and outnumbered many times, at the end there was no one left to impress among them as they were wiped out. The Macedonians ended up winning this battle, but despite the fight lasting for hours, the casualties were very low. The objective of this battle was not to kill the coalition fighters, but rather to show them who was in charge, so the losing side was not chased in order to inflict maximum damage. After all, Philip wanted to rule them. He needed them alive, because they would be more valuable to him in the future. As Greeks, they were potential future soldiers for his campaign against Persia. After this battle, Philip was accepted as the supreme ruler of Greece. Now that the war is over, in what should have been a period of peace and celebration, Philip decided to take another wife. This time it was different, as she was actually a Macedonian from an elite family named Cleopatra. This situation was concerning because Alexander, at this point, was the accepted heir to the Macedonian throne. However, if Cleopatra gave birth to a boy, he would be considered a purebred Macedonian, potentially having a stronger claim to the throne than Alexander. This caused Alexander and his mother, Olympias, to worry, as Olympias was from Epirus, making Alexander only half Macedonian by blood. Following the wedding, there was a party, a banquet to celebrate the wedding, and here, of course, everybody was seriously drunk. But then one guy, the uncle of the bride, raises his cup to give a toast, probably already trying to push forward his own bloodline from the future offspring, and says that the gods may bless the union with a legitimate heir to the throne. Next, we see Alexander, the insecure, replying by calling this guy, and I quote, a villain, then asking, or pulling a Jon Snow card, "What am I then? A bastard?" and then throwing his cup of wine at him. Well, it's obvious what Alexander hoped would happen next, but that didn't happen. I said it didn't. Anyway, what happens is that Philip actually draws his sword out on Alexander and advances towards him, and then he fell down as he was too drunk to walk and trips, pushing the metaphorical knife into the wound as Alexander says, "Behold a man who makes preparations to pass out of Europe into Asia, and he can't even cross from one table to another." After this, Alexander becomes the self-exiled and lives with his mother, leading her to Epirus. Then he goes to the Illyrians. Not long after, Philip sends for them and Alexander accepts the reconciliation and returns. However, there is no evidence that the father-son relationship was improving, as Cleopatra gave Philip the joy of a son, which Alexander and Olympias feared. The reconciliation didn't last long at all. The ruler of Caria sent a trusted envoy to Philip with a proposal. He wanted to marry his eldest daughter to Philip's other son, Aridius, Alexander's older half-brother. Now, usually the eldest son would be the natural heir to the throne, but Aridius had a mental condition. We are not told what exactly, but we know he was unfit to rule. Even so, he was still significant because of his royal bloodline, and marrying him meant joining the powerful Macedonian family. The ruler of Caria figured this marriage would secure Philip's support, but events soon went out of control. Alexander's mother, along with a few so-called friends, started filling his head with all sorts of poisonous tales. They suggested that Philip, by arranging this grand marriage, was actually setting the stage to hand over the kingdom to Aridius. Alarm bells started ringing in Alexander's mind. To counter this perceived threat, he didn't hesitate. He sent someone all the way to Caria to convince the ruler that Aridius was nothing more than an illegitimate fool. Alexander offered himself as a much better choice for a son-in-law, and, as expected, the ruler liked this new proposal far better. But when Philip heard what his son had done, he was furious. He stormed into Alexander's chamber, dragging along one of Alexander's closest friends. There, Philip angrily yelled at Alexander. How could his son be so disgraceful, so unworthy of the great power he was destined to inherit, as to seek an alliance with a mere Carian? Then he wrote to the Corinthians, demanding they send Alexander's messenger to him in chains. Determined to make an example, he also banished Alexander's friends, the very ones who had poisoned his mind, friends Alexander would later recall and elevate to high honor. Philip also makes preparations to invade Asia, and sends there one of his best generals, Parmenion, to establish a bridgehead and another emissary to the Oracle of Delphi again to check if his campaign into Asia would be a success. The answer was, "The bull is ready, the sacrifice is ready." If you think about this, it could go either way, as the oracle doesn't specify whether the bull represents the Macedonians or the Persians. It will turn out that neither is true. The prophecy would come true, as always, in the most unexpected way. The bull would be Philip himself. Once he receives the response, interpreting it as a good omen for him, as if he would slaughter the Persians like animals, he organizes sacrifices, banquets, contests, and a grand celebration in the ancient capital of Igi. Then, a wedding takes place between Philip's daughter, Cleopatra, and Alexander I of Epirus, her uncle. Everybody is happy and celebrating except for this guy. He is Pausanias, who, having suffered a grave humiliation and finding no justice from Philip, is sharpening his knife to ruin the party for everyone. How would he assassinate the king at this grand public event with so many eyes watching? What intricate plan might he have devised to shift the blame, make it look like an accident, or perhaps implicate another in the crime, or maybe even stage an accident during the festivities? Well, apparently, he just didn't care, or he wasn't very clever, as he chose the most direct and audacious route. He would kill the king openly, with as many witnesses as possible, meaning everybody. At first glance, it looks like living wasn't his #1 priority, but once the king was dead, he would try to escape by simply running. Of course, his confidence in his speed didn't pay off, as there were others faster than him who managed to catch him, and he was killed on the spot. And so, with Philip's blood still wet on the ground, our boy becomes Alexander the King. More videos are in the works right now, and if you enjoyed this one, subscribe and press the bell button to get notified when the next video is released.